No one paid attention when a small-town electrician walked into a billion-dollar technology company wearing dusty work boots and an old work jacket. The executives laughed, the engineers rolled their eyes, and the company's powerful director looked him up and down before saying, "Who let this country electrician into my building?" The room erupted in laughter. But what none of them knew was that the man they were mocking had already spotted a fatal flaw hidden deep inside the company's server infrastructure, a flaw that would soon bring a $100 million project to the brink of disaster. 48 hours later, alarms would be screaming, investors would be panicking, and the same executives who laughed at him would be desperately searching for the only person capable of saving them. And in a moment that would shock everyone in the room, the director who humiliated him would find herself on her knees, begging the country electrician she once called worthless to save her company before everything collapsed. The sun had barely risen over the quiet town of Willow Creek when Ethan Carter was already at work. While most people were still asleep, he stood on top of a steel platform inside a manufacturing warehouse, carefully repairing a damaged electrical panel. Sparks flashed briefly as he tightened the final connection. The factory manager watched anxiously from below. "Will it hold?" the man asked. Ethan climbed down, wiped the grease from his hands, and gave a small nod. "It wasn't the panel that failed," he said calmly. "The overload came from a faulty backup circuit. You can run the system safely now." The manager stared at him in disbelief. 3 different technicians had inspected the problem over the past week, and none of them had found the real cause. Yet Ethan had solved it in less than an hour. "You always make it look easy," the manager said. Ethan simply smiled. "Most problems tell you what's wrong if you're willing to listen." The manager handed him a check and thanked him repeatedly, but Ethan's attention was already elsewhere. He glanced at his watch. "I have to go," he said. "My daughter has a science presentation this afternoon." Nothing was more important than Lily. 20 minutes later, Ethan parked his aging pickup truck outside a small elementary school. Through the classroom window, he could see 10-year-old Lily standing proudly beside a homemade solar energy project. The moment she spotted him, her face lit up. "You made it!" she shouted as she ran outside. "I promised I would," Ethan replied. Lily wrapped her arms around him. Many people in town knew Ethan as the quiet electrician who could fix almost anything. What they didn't know was that years ago, he had been one of the most brilliant systems engineers in the technology industry. He had once worked on large-scale infrastructure projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But that was before tragedy changed everything. After his wife passed away unexpectedly, Ethan walked away from the corporate world. Promotions, stock options, and executive titles suddenly meant nothing to him. He chose a simpler life, one focused on raising his daughter. And for 10 years, he never regretted that decision. As father and daughter drove home that afternoon, Ethan's phone suddenly rang. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. "Hello, Mr. Carter?" a professional voice asked. "Yes. My name is Emily Parker. I'm calling from Nexacore Technologies." Ethan frowned slightly. Everyone knew Nexacore. It was one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the country. The company had recently announced a massive artificial intelligence platform expected to generate more than $100 million in contracts. "What can I do for you?" Ethan asked. "We recently opened a new data center outside Willow Creek," Emily explained. "Our contractors are experiencing recurring electrical failures. Your name was recommended by several local businesses." Ethan remained silent for a moment. Large data centers weren't ordinary buildings. They required incredibly complex electrical infrastructure. "Have your engineers inspected the problem?" "Several times. And they still haven't solved it." "No?" Ethan glanced at Lily. She was listening quietly from the passenger seat. "What do you think, Dad?" she asked. He smiled. "I think somebody has a very expensive problem." The next morning, Ethan drove to the Nexacore facility. The building looked more like a futuristic fortress than a workplace. Glass walls reflected the morning sunlight. Luxury vehicles filled the parking lot. Employees carrying expensive laptops moved quickly through the entrance. The moment Ethan stepped out of his pickup truck, he felt the stares. His work boots were dusty. His jacket showed signs of years of physical labor. Compared to the polished executives around him, he looked completely out of place. At the security gate, a guard blocked his path. Deliveries are around back. Ethan handed him his visitor authorization. "I'm here to inspect the electrical systems." The guard looked surprised. "You?" Before Ethan could answer, another voice interrupted. "Is there a problem?" A tall man in a designer suit approached. Ryan Blake, head of technical operations. The guard explained the situation. Ryan looked Ethan up and down. His expression quickly turned into a smirk. "This is the electrician." The sarcasm in his voice was impossible to miss. "I expected someone from an engineering firm." Ethan remained calm. Electrical systems don't care where the person fixing them comes from. A few nearby employees chuckled. Ryan laughed openly. "That's actually funny." Without another word, he led Ethan inside. As they walked through the massive facility, Ethan immediately noticed several unusual details. Backup power routing, server rack distribution, cooling redundancies, emergency failover architecture. Something didn't look right. Very wrong, in fact. When they entered the main operations center, dozens of engineers sat in front of giant monitoring screens. And standing at the center of the room was Victoria Hayes, the company's celebrated director, the woman responsible for the highly anticipated $100 million AI project. Ryan approached her. "The electrician is here." Victoria turned around. Her eyes landed on Ethan's work clothes, then on his worn boots, then on the tool bag hanging from his shoulder. A faint smile appeared on her face. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile people wear when they've already decided someone isn't worth taking seriously. "This is our expert?" she asked. Several people laughed quietly. Ryan shrugged. "Apparently," Victoria folded her arms. Interesting. For a brief moment, the room felt less like a workplace and more like a courtroom. Everyone seemed to be judging him before he had spoken a single word. But Ethan didn't care. He wasn't there to impress anyone. He was there to solve a problem. What he didn't know yet was that within the next 48 hours, every person in that room would remember his name. And some of them would wish they had treated him very differently. The laughter faded as Victoria handed Ethan a temporary access badge and instructed one of the engineers to escort him through the facility. While most of the staff returned to their workstations, a few continued glancing at him with amused expressions, as if they were watching an outsider wander into a world far above his station. Ethan ignored them. Over the next several hours, he carefully inspected every part of the data center's power infrastructure. Unlike the engineers who focused primarily on software and server performance, Ethan looked at the facility as one interconnected system. Power, cooling, load balancing, backup redundancy, emergency failover. Everything had to work together. The deeper he investigated, the more concerned he became. By late afternoon, he was standing alone in one of the restricted power distribution rooms, staring at a wall of monitoring equipment. Something was wrong. Very wrong. At first glance, the system appeared impressive. State-of-the-art backup batteries, multiple power feeds, advanced protection systems. On paper, it looked nearly perfect, but Ethan had learned long ago that the most dangerous problems were often hidden behind perfect-looking designs. He studied several diagnostic reports. Then he compared them with the original infrastructure plans. His expression darkened. There it was, the flaw, a small configuration error, buried deep within the backup power architecture. Most people would never notice it. But Ethan immediately understood the danger. If the facility ever experienced a sudden spike in demand during a high-load operation, the backup systems could begin feeding conflicting signals into the network. The result would be catastrophic. Power instability, server synchronization failures, massive system crashes, potential data corruption, a chain reaction capable of shutting down the entire operation. And with Nexacore preparing to launch its largest AI project in company history, the risk was growing every day. That evening, Ethan requested a meeting. Victoria reluctantly agreed. The following morning, a conference room filled with department heads, senior engineers, and project managers. Large screens displayed performance charts and launch schedules. The atmosphere was confident, optimistic. Everyone was focused on the upcoming investor demonstration scheduled just days away. Everyone except Ethan. Standing near the end of the conference table, he connected a laptop and displayed several diagrams. "I've identified the source of your recurring failures," he said. The room immediately became quiet. Victoria leaned back in her chair. "Let's hear it." Ethan pointed toward the schematic. "Your backup power system has a structural flaw in its failover configuration." Several engineers exchanged skeptical looks. Ryan crossed his arms. "What kind of flaw?" Ethan zoomed in on the diagram. "The UPS architecture is creating a hidden feedback loop between two redundant power paths." One engineer frowned. "That shouldn't be possible." "It is," Ethan replied. He highlighted several sections. "Under normal conditions, everything works fine. But during a sudden surge, both systems can begin responding to each other instead of the load itself." The room remained silent. Some people appeared confused. Others looked annoyed. Ethan continued. "If server demand spikes during the AI demonstration, the backup network could destabilize. Once that happens, you'll see cascading failures across multiple clusters." Ryan shook his head. "No." Ethan looked at him. "No? Our systems were designed by some of the best engineers in the industry." Ethan remained calm. "And engineers make mistakes." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Ryan's expression hardened. "You're claiming that our entire infrastructure team missed something this basic?" "I'm saying the system doesn't care who built it." Victoria finally spoke. "How certain are you?" 100%. The room fell silent again. Ethan clicked to the next slide. It contained simulations, load projections, failure scenarios, predicted shutdown sequences. The evidence was difficult to ignore. But admitting he was right would mean admitting their own experts were wrong. And for some people, pride was more important than facts. Ryan suddenly laughed, not because he found anything funny, because he wanted everyone else to dismiss Ethan too. "Let me get this straight," he said. "A small-town electrician walks in here and claims he understands advanced AI infrastructure better than an entire team of engineers from MIT, Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon." Several people chuckled. Ethan didn't react. Ryan pointed toward the screen. "These are billion-dollar systems." Ethan nodded. "And electricity still follows the same laws." A few younger engineers quietly smiled. Ryan did not. Victoria stared at the diagrams for several moments. Part of her knew the warning deserved attention, but another part of her couldn't shake the image of the man standing before her. The dusty boots, the work jacket, the pickup truck. Nothing about him looked like the kind of person who should be correcting her engineers. Finally, she closed the report. "We appreciate your opinion." Opinion, not analysis, not evidence. Opinion. Ethan immediately understood. They had already made their decision. Victoria slid the folder across the table. "Our internal team will review your concerns." It was a polite dismissal. Nothing more. The meeting was over. As employees began leaving the room, Ryan walked past Ethan and lowered his voice. "You know what your problem is?" Ethan looked at him. You actually think people like you belong in rooms like this?" Then Ryan walked away smiling. For a moment, Ethan simply stood there. Not angry, not offended, just disappointed. Because the warning he had given wasn't about ego. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about preventing a disaster. And disasters didn't care about pride. Outside, Ethan packed his tools into his truck. The afternoon sun was beginning to set. Just as he opened the driver's door, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Kevin Moore, one of the younger engineers. Kevin looked nervous. "I read your report," he said quietly. Ethan waited. "I think you might be right." "Might?" Kevin sighed. "I can't prove it yet." Ethan nodded. "That means you're already ahead of most people in there." Kevin glanced back toward the building. "What happens if nobody listens?" Ethan looked at the giant data center standing against the evening sky. Then he answered calmly. "The same thing that always happens when a warning is ignored." "What?" Ethan opened the truck door. Reality eventually joins the meeting. Kevin watched him drive away. And for the first time, a feeling of unease settled deep inside him, because despite all the degrees, all the certifications, and all the expensive technology surrounding him, the person who seemed most certain about the future wasn't inside the billion-dollar facility. It was the electrician they had just laughed out of the room. And somewhere inside the data center, hidden behind glowing screens and confident projections, a ticking time bomb was waiting for its moment. 3 days later, Nexacor's headquarters was buzzing with excitement. This was the day everything had been building toward. After years of development and nearly $100 million in investments, the company was finally ready to unveil its revolutionary artificial intelligence platform to the world. Investors had flown in from across the country. Technology journalists filled the media section. Major business networks prepared live coverage. Executives walked through the building with nervous smiles, rehearsing presentations and checking schedules one last time. For Victoria Hayes, this was more than a product launch. It was the moment that could define her entire career. If today's demonstration succeeded, Nexacor would secure several massive contracts already waiting for final approval. The company's valuation could double overnight, and Victoria would become one of the most celebrated executives in the industry. At least, that was the plan. By mid-morning, the main presentation hall was packed. Large screens displayed the Nexacor logo. Rows of investors sat waiting. Journalists prepared cameras. Excitement filled the room. Backstage, Ryan Blake looked completely relaxed. "We're going to make history today," he told the engineering team. Several employees applauded. Kevin Moore tried to smile, but he couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's report. For the past 3 days, he had secretly reviewed portions of the infrastructure. The more he examined the system, the more uncomfortable he became. There were inconsistencies, small ones, easy to dismiss. Yet somehow they matched Ethan's warnings. Twice, Kevin had considered speaking up. Twice, he had remained silent. Now, it was too late. The launch was already underway. At exactly 10 a.m., Victoria stepped onto the stage. The audience erupted into applause. "Good morning, everyone," she began confidently. "Today," she explained, Nexacor would demonstrate an AI platform capable of processing vast amounts of data faster than anything currently available on the market. The presentation started flawlessly. The AI answered questions in real time. Complex simulations ran smoothly. Investors nodded with approval. Everything appeared perfect. Inside the data center several miles away, thousands of servers operated at increasing capacity. Load levels climbed steadily, 40%, 50%, 60%. Engineers monitored the system carefully. Everything remained stable. Then, the first warning appeared. A small yellow notification flashed on a monitoring screen. One technician frowned. "That's strange," What? Minor power fluctuation. His supervisor glanced at the data. Probably nothing. The warning disappeared. Operations continued. Back at the presentation, Victoria smiled as investors applauded another successful demonstration. The company's future seemed brighter than ever. Then, a second warning appeared. This time, several alerts flashed simultaneously. Power variance, load imbalance, synchronization delay. The technicians sat upright. That's not normal. Another engineer rushed over. What happened? I don't know. The alerts vanished again. For a brief moment, everything stabilized. Then, disaster struck. Inside the power infrastructure, the hidden flaw Ethan had warned about finally awakened. A sudden spike in processing demand triggered the backup architecture. Both redundant systems attempted to compensate at the same time. Instead of supporting each other, they began fighting each other. Exactly as Ethan had predicted, the feedback loop spread through the network. Voltage fluctuations multiplied. Backup controls became confused. Server clusters started losing synchronization. One rack disconnected, then another, then dozens more. Within seconds, warning alarms exploded across the facility. Red lights flashed everywhere. Engineers jumped from their seats. What just happened? Cluster 12 is offline. Backup systems aren't responding. We lost synchronization. Server groups are disconnecting. The room descended into chaos. At headquarters, Victoria was halfway through the most important presentation of her life when the giant screen behind her suddenly froze. The audience became quiet. A loading icon appeared, then another. Then the entire display went black. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was terrifying. Victoria turned toward the technical staff. What happened? No one answered, because no one knew. Across the building, panic spread rapidly. More alarms sounded, more systems failed. Within minutes, nearly half of the AI platform had become inaccessible. Investors exchanged worried looks. Journalists began whispering. Cameras continued recording everything. Victoria felt her stomach drop. "Get it back online," she ordered. Engineers scrambled toward their workstations. Ryan's confidence disappeared almost instantly. "Restart the clusters." "We already tried." "Run emergency recovery." "It's not responding." "Switch to backups." "The backups are causing the problem." For the first time that day, genuine fear appeared on Ryan's face. Meanwhile, Kevin stared at the diagnostics flooding across his monitor. His blood ran cold. Every failure pattern matched Ethan's report. Every prediction, every warning, every single one. He opened the old file Ethan had submitted, then compared it with the live failure logs. The similarities were undeniable. "Oh no," Kevin whispered. "What?" another engineer asked. Kevin looked up slowly. "He was right. Kevin... The room suddenly felt very small. Thousands of servers continued crashing. The AI platform became unstable. Several investors quietly left the presentation hall to make urgent phone calls. News of the failure was already spreading online. Nexacor's stock began falling. Millions of dollars vanished within minutes. Victoria rushed into the operations center. "What is the status?" Nobody answered immediately. Finally, one senior engineer spoke. "We don't know." "What do you mean you don't know?" "We can't isolate the source." Victoria stared at him. "You're telling me our entire technical team doesn't know why the system is collapsing?" The engineer lowered his head. "Yes." The answer hit the room like a bomb. For years, Victoria had trusted the best engineers money could hire. Now, none of them could stop the disaster. Ryan grabbed a phone. "Call our consultants." Within an hour, emergency specialists from multiple firms joined the investigation remotely. Then came international experts. Then, additional infrastructure consultants. Millions more dollars were spent trying to stop the bleeding. Nothing worked. Every attempted solution made the situation worse. Hours passed. The servers continued failing. The AI platform remained crippled. Investors were demanding answers. Board members were demanding explanations. The media was demanding statements. And still, nobody could fix the problem. Late that evening, the exhausted engineering team gathered around the main diagnostics screen. The atmosphere felt hopeless. Then Kevin finally stood up. His hands were shaking. "I know who can fix it." Everyone looked at him. Ryan frowned. "What are you talking about?" Kevin swallowed hard. Then he opened Ethan Carter's report. The same report everyone had laughed at. The same report everyone had ignored. The same report predicting everything that was happening right now. He placed it on the table. Silence filled the room. Victoria slowly stared at the familiar name written across the top. Ethan Carter, the electrician, the man they had humiliated, the man they had dismissed, the man who had warned them. And suddenly, for the first time since the disaster began, Victoria felt something far worse than panic. Regret. Because deep down, she already knew the truth. The one person capable of saving the company was no longer sitting inside the building. He was at home, and after the way they had treated him, there was no guarantee he would ever come back. The operations center had never been this quiet. Only hours earlier, dozens of engineers had been rushing between workstations, shouting commands and searching desperately for answers. Now the room felt heavy, with exhaustion and failure. The giant monitoring wall glowed red. More server clusters had gone offline. Recovery attempts continued to fail. Millions of dollars were disappearing every hour, and for the first time since the crisis began, nobody was pretending they had the situation under control. Victoria stood at the center of the room, staring at Ethan Carter's report. The same report she had dismissed without a second thought. The same report that now read like a prediction of the disaster unfolding around them. Every warning had come true. Every failure sequence matched. Every risk he had identified was happening in real time. The realization made her stomach tighten. She had laughed at the only person who understood the problem. Ryan looked equally defeated. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot. Hours earlier, he had still believed one of the world's top consulting firms would save them. Now, even those experts were admitting defeat. One of the consultants appeared on a video screen. "We've exhausted every standard recovery procedure." Victoria stared at him. "What does that mean?" The consultant hesitated. "It means whoever diagnosed this issue originally understands the architecture better than anyone currently working on it." Silence filled the room. Everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. Kevin finally broke the silence. "We need Ethan." Nobody argued. Not anymore. The arrogance was gone. Reality had crushed it. Victoria slowly picked up her phone. For several seconds, she simply stared at Ethan's number. Then she pressed call. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Finally, Ethan answered. "Hello?" His voice sounded calm, peaceful, completely different from the chaos-consuming Nexacore. Victoria swallowed. For the first time in years, she found herself struggling to find the right words. "Mr. Carter, this is Victoria Hayes." A brief silence followed. "I know." Ethan's answer was polite. Nothing more. Victoria took a breath. "We have a situation." I third. The simplicity of his response made the conversation even more uncomfortable. The disaster was already making headlines. Everyone had heard. Victoria glanced around the room. Dozens of people were listening, waiting, hoping. "We need your help." Another silence. Then Ethan spoke. "I warned you." No anger, no bitterness, just truth. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment. He was right. Completely right. "Yes," she admitted quietly. You were. Across the room, several executives lowered their heads. Nobody could deny it anymore. Victoria continued, "If you're willing to come back, we'll compensate you generously." Ethan remained silent. Then came an answer nobody expected. No. The room froze. Victoria blinked. "I'm sorry?" "No." For a moment she thought she had heard him incorrectly. "Mr. Carter, this project is worth over $100 million. I know. We can pay whatever you want. It's not about money." Victoria felt her chest tighten. Then Ethan said something that left the entire room speechless. "My daughter has her science exhibition tonight." Nobody spoke. Several executives exchanged uncomfortable looks. For Ethan, the most important event in the world wasn't a $100 million project. It was his daughter's school presentation. Victoria suddenly realized how little she understood the man she had mocked. "You're choosing a school event over this?" "No," Ethan replied calmly. "I'm choosing my daughter." The line went silent again. And somehow those 4 words carried more weight than any speech Victoria had ever heard. Across the room, Kevin looked away. Even Ryan seemed unable to speak. For years they had chased promotions, contracts, bonuses, and titles. Meanwhile, the man they called a country electrician understood something they had forgotten. Some things mattered more than success. Victoria looked toward the giant screens. Another server cluster had just failed. Millions more dollars were vanishing. She knew time was running out. "Please," she said. The word felt strange coming from her. She wasn't used to asking. She certainly wasn't used to begging. But desperation was beginning to replace pride. "Ethan, please help us." Before Ethan could respond, another voice suddenly appeared in the background. A young girl's voice. "Dad? Lily." Victoria heard Ethan turn away from the phone. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "I finished my project. Let me see." A few seconds passed. Then Lily laughed happily. Victoria listened without meaning to. For a moment, the chaos inside Nexacore felt very far away. Finally, Ethan returned to the call. "What do you need?" The entire room straightened. Hope returned instantly. Victoria explained the latest failures, the recovery attempts, the worsening cascade, the international consultants, everything. Ethan listened carefully, without interrupting. When she finished, he asked only 3 questions. 3. Not 30, not 50. 3. After hearing the answers, Ethan sighed. "The problem has already spread farther than I expected." Victoria's heart sank. "Can it be fixed?" A long pause followed. Finally, Ethan answered, "Yes." The room exploded with relief. Several engineers nearly cheered. Victoria felt her knees weaken. For the first time all day, someone had given them hope. "Then you'll come?" Before Ethan could answer, another voice suddenly echoed through the operations center. A deep voice, confident, authoritative. Everyone turned. Michael Turner had arrived. The founder, the chairman, the man who rarely appeared during daily operations. The room immediately fell silent. Michael walked toward the conference table. His eyes moved from Victoria to Ryan, and finally to Ethan's report. Then he spoke. "You're finally calling the right person." Victoria frowned. "You know Ethan Carter?" Michael looked at her. Then he gave a small, almost amused smile. "Know him?" The chairman slowly picked up the report. Without Ethan Carter, this company might never have existed. The room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Victoria stared at him. Ryan's face went pale. Kevin looked completely stunned. "What do you mean?" Victoria whispered. Michael looked around the room. Then he delivered the sentence that changed everything. "The man you're begging for help isn't just an electrician." He paused. "The core architecture behind Nexacore's original infrastructure was designed by Ethan Carter himself." Complete silence. No one could believe what they had just heard. And for the first time since the crisis began, Victoria realized she didn't actually know who Ethan Carter was. Not at all. And what Michael was about to reveal next would shake the entire company to its foundation. With no other options left, Victoria personally drove to Ethan's home. Standing in front of the modest house, she finally saw the life he had chosen over fame and fortune. For the first time in her career, pride gave way to humility. She apologized sincerely and asked for his help. Ethan agreed, not for Victoria, not for the company, and not for the money, but for the thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on the project. Hours later, he arrived at the data center and immediately identified the root cause of the failure. While teams of experts watched in disbelief, Ethan carefully reconfigured the power architecture, stabilized the backup systems, and restored synchronization across the server network. One by one, the warning lights disappeared. The servers came back online. The AI platform restarted. The investors erupted into applause as the system finally returned to full operation. The $100 million project had been saved. As the operations center celebrated, Victoria stood silently watching the man she had once mocked. The country, Electrician, everyone laughed at had accomplished what the world's most expensive consultants could not. And in that moment, everyone in the room learned the same lesson. True expertise doesn't wear a title. Sometimes it arrives in dusty work boots, carrying a toolbox.